Morning. Ready for our trip? There's no coach.
Here we are outside the Guilds, just 15 minutes late, well 20 minutes late. We've got all the students on the coach and it's about to happen.
Can you just do that health and safety announcement again please, John?
Looks a bit as a car park and stuff.
Oh, okay, cool.
Let me know, okay.
Well, do you want to, if you want to come in and have a listen to the talks and stuff as well.
Oh, what's it about? I've never heard of this museum.
A bit about the museum itself, which is a pottery factory,
Right, yeah.
and then a bit about the donor intention behind the charity that now holds a collection.
We put you up.
Yeah.
I might pop in, you know.
Yeah. And then, yeah, well, if you come with us, then you'll just be in our group, so you'll be fine, yeah. Cool.
Google Maps said it would take about an hour and a half, what do you reckon?
It just, if the M6 is clear, we'll be okay. It might be even less.
I thought even less, yeah, because it often gets it wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not far off Junction 15, but because of the height restriction, we've just got to go a little bit around just so we can get into the museum. But at this time, we should be okay.
Yeah.
It's just the M6 because of the 50 mile an hour that the road works. It takes a bit longer sometimes.
We're going to start the talk a bit later. We're interested in the fact all went insolvent. They don't know that. So they're going to have a surprise when we start talking about where they went bust. That is what's interesting about it. Very valuable collection. It almost got lost because it wasn't held properly on trust. It was held just by the company as an asset, so when it went bust, it almost went to the creditors.
everybody, and welcome to the world of Wedgwood and the Wedgwood Museum, where you are at the moment. My name is Lucy Laird. I'm the archivist here at the museum, and the reason I'm talking to you today is because when your tutors approached with a visit here, saying that from the University of Liverpool, I said I'm really actually fortunate today because in 2013 I graduated from the University of Liverpool in the history department, so it's very nice to see Liverpool University hats and sweatshirts, and I like that. So anyway, welcome to the museum. I'm going to talk to you for about 20 minutes, really quickly about why the museum is important, which will lead on to your later discussions today. So I'm going to whiz through 250 years as quickly as I can, picking out some really important factors. So, the Wedgwood Museum is one of the oldest industrial museums in the country. It was founded in 1906, and the man down there is our original curator, and occasionally we still get phone calls, especially from places like China, asking to speak to the museum curator Isaac. We have to explain he's been dead for about 18 years, but nevertheless we're here to help. But many of these items are really unique in the sense that when this museum was founded, it was based upon the fact that they'd been exploring the original factory at Etruria, and they'd uncovered this sort of hidden room that was full of old pots and documents. And from there, because the family was still very heavily involved in the running of the business, they thought we need to do something with this, we need to put this on display. So a lot of these old pots and items were found on work, e.g. they went around the factory saying, this looks old and interesting, we'll have it for the museum. That practice continues today. We still have regular trawls around the factory taking pieces into our collection to preserve them for posterity's sake. So if there are a couple of pieces in here that I recognise still in the museum, that item I recognise the Portland vase down there, a couple of these busts at the top, they are still on display after 112 years. However, we're not just a museum, we also hold the Wedgwood Museum archives. Now this is the bit that I look after, this is where you normally find me. It doesn't look the most visually exciting place, but in those boxes there are 250 years of material, anything from original letters from the Wedgwood family, and I'll touch on those a bit more later, orders going back to the 18th century, original catalogues, shape books, price listings, anything and everything you can think of, you can probably find in the museum archives. And really uniquely, and this is something that is only for the archives and not for the museum collection itself, the museum archives were recognised by the UK Memory of the World programme as being one of the most complete ceramic manufacturing archives in existence, encompassing all of those various factors which I won't go through, but unparalleled in its diversity and breadth, from 80,000 plus documents. That figure's wrong, I think it should be at least 2 or 3 times that probably, which embrace every imaginable subject from pot to people, transport to trade, society and social conditions. So that's really special. Only a very few places in the UK actually hold this Memory of the World programme, world sort of significance. Some documents that are also included within this Memory of the World documents being of really important national importance include the execution warrant of Charles I, some of the papers I think of Florence Nightingale, so we are on that level in terms of historical importance. So talking about the family papers, because we are family and a business archive, I'll just run through some of these very quickly, but we have the papers of Josiah Wedgwood, who was our founder. The company was founded in 1759, but we do have letters that predate that as well. We have letters from his wife over here, Sarah, and then a little bit further down the family tree, the family gets involved in lots of different things. So the gentleman in black and white, in the third one across, is one of Josiah Wedgwood's sons. His name is Tom Wedgwood, and he has been recognised now as being the father of English photography because of his early experiments with transferring images. So we have very few papers related to those experiments, but more broadly related to his life, we have all that archive here. You might possibly recognise the gentleman right at the far end, that is Charles Darwin. And the Wedgwood-Darwin link is because Charles Darwin is the grandson of Josiah Wedgwood. So Wedgwood's eldest daughter married into the Darwin family, and their youngest son in turn was Charles. We actually have a letter here in the archive written by young Charles Darwin to his uncle Josiah II, basically complaining that his father would let him go off on this amazing round-the-world trip that he'd been promised. Uncle Josiah writes to Charles Darwin's father and says, "Go on, let him." And that, of course, is the voyage of the Beagle, and everything else from there sort of continues. So that's, again, really interesting. We have later family members as well. So you've got here Godfrey Wedgwood, who really sort of kept the factory going in those difficult years we had in the Victorian period. Cecil down here is a man that I've been doing a lot of work on, and he was the managing director from about 1902 to 1916, at which point he was killed in the Battle of the Somme. Again, interesting historical links with that. And then finally, the man at the bottom is Josiah Wedgwood V, who was important in locating the factory from Etruria, where it had been, and then moving it over here to Barlston into the clean, fresh air with all the facilities that would offer. So just to sort of give you some idea of how important the collection is and how the archives in the museum sort of tie together. These two items are actually on display next door in the museum, and these are known as the first days vases. These are the only items in the museum we can say hand on heart were actually thrown by Josiah Wedgwood himself in 1769, and they celebrate the very first day's production at his factory at Etruria. However, the archive also contains the original shape book, so you can actually see the shape of the first day's vase, and the original books from which Wedgwood lifted the designs in order to stick on his own vases as well. So these are contemporary prints in the 18th century, which then Wedgwood then used for himself. We have, so again, some of my favourite things in the archive, Josiah Wedgwood's Commonplace book, which is basically his notebook of interesting things you just want to forget. So this one is a really interesting page. It contains his listings for the rules of his workforce, basically in the 18th century, and some of those items include no football, no graffitiing on the wall, but he's also sort of very aware of issues like lead poisoning in the ceramic industry, because lead was used in glazes. In certain departments where this dust sort of settled on the floor, they didn't sweep it up, they mopped it up, so they weren't kicking all this dust back into the air, people were breathing it in. But certainly really important things like 18th century factory management, something that you wouldn't necessarily associate with our archives, can be found here. But also tucked away over there at the very far end is his recipe for making slow wine, because why not make a note of that for posterity's sake. We also have a really important set of documents, which is perhaps over 1,000 or so letters between Thomas Bentley, who was Josiah Wedgwood's business partner, and Wedgwood, which this sort of partnership lasts from 1769 to 1780, but the letters extend before that as well. And basically they were corresponding virtually every single day on business matters, on family matters. They were gossiping about the latest news, they were sharing latest scientific ideas, and these documents survive in the archive. Unfortunately, we do not have Bentley's responses, we only have Wedgwood's letters to him, so where those letters have gone in the 200 or so years since Wedgwood passed away, we have no idea. But nevertheless, they're a fascinating record, of two men's lives in the 18th century. Among other things we have a huge amount of employee records. It's not just sort of like the managing directors of the company. So this is a photo album of people, of workers on the factory at Etruria, taken in 1898. You can see this is Isaac Cook, the museum director, down here again. You might just see he's balancing rather carefully that bust on one knee, and I like how they've stuck one in that window as well. But this is, say, the Jasper decorators, and they have named all these people down at the bottom, and that's a really nice family resource, because I do get inquiries from people saying, my great-great-grandfather used to work for Wedgwood, what did he do? And I have to go away and say, well, actually, we've got a picture of him from this time, so that's a really nice thing to share with people. We also have quite an important important role, the museum and the archives as well today, for the general running of the business. So I get a lot of requests from the design department, and they come down quite frequently to peruse the Wedgwood pattern books, which we have hundreds of them. This is the very first Wedgwood pattern book, so the very first Wedgwood design is thin blue line. But as you go on, the patterns do get slightly more adventurous. But even today, the company will come down and they'll lift designs from the 18th century pattern books and then reproduce them on modern wear. If any of you have been into the flagship store, you might have seen those very brightly coloured plates called a Wanderlust. All of those designs were taken directly from the museum archive and then recoloured for a modern audience. And I was involved in that in my own small way, and that was a really exciting project for us to be involved with. So again, we're still relevant to the business as well. Did I get that right around? So in terms of the Wedgwood Museum, I won't touch too much, of course, because I know that both John and John want to be looking at this a little later on. But today, the Wedgwood Museum collection is owned by the V&A, and I won't say much more than that. So today, I am an employee of the company Wedgwood, but I answer and look after a collection that's housed by, is owned by the V&A, but housed here on long-term loan. So that's how that sort of relationship works, and I'll happily answer any questions about that a little bit later on as well, if those arise. We have a lot of very strong local links with various universities in the area as the museum. So one of them is at Keele University. There's a relationship we have that's quite strong as well is with Staffs University, so again, two local institutions. We have student groups come in, we engage with students, but we engage with children from about the age of 4 onwards, especially with the sort of curriculum around it. The curriculum nowadays is focused much more on local history. We play a role in sort of teaching people, engaging children with history in the area. Just a couple more things of items that we have in our collection. It's just a random page of catalogues of wear, which includes original price lists down the side, so I get notifications in and they ask me what they are. Another page from the Wedgwood pattern books, which again is rather nice. This is again just a selection of some of the items just in our pattern book room. So there are over 300 pattern books in the Wedgwood archives, and that isn't just for Wedgwood, they are for subsidiary companies as well that the company has taken over throughout the last sort of 50, 60 years or so, and they are all housed here as well in specialist conditions. We have a lot of design papers as well. So this was one of the original plans for this very factory that you can sort of see out the window behind you when it was originally touted as an idea to be built in 1936. So the company was moving out of the police went into fresh air. So unfortunately this was never built because of the outbreak of the Second World War. But it's a really nice example of what else we have in our collection. And again, we can tell a lot of social history. So this is a really nice image of Queen Elizabeth visiting us in 1955. And we said to her, what pattern would you like? And this is her picking her pattern. This is Appledore. And apparently she still uses this in one of her palaces today. So we have lots of links with royalties at the time. But we also have sort of more day-to-day functional objects. So this is a shape called Shape 225. Which was actually designed by the designer of the Coca-Cola bottle, as we now know it, Jerome Gould. But we have all of the original designs as well, just creating the shape, again, in our archive. And this does inform the way we sort of interpret our collection as well. And then, again, I did talk very quickly about this chap just a moment ago, but we do a lot of social history as well here at the museum. We're not just about the ceramics and the pots. So one of the things that we've spent a lot of time over the last 4 years doing is a project looking at these soldiers from the First World War who were formerly employees here, who went to go and fight. There were 169 of them, and we have over 300 letters from these men written back to the company sharing their experience of the war, basically. We have these letters from Cecil Wedgwood, who is a gentleman who was killed on the Somme. And again, he was writing letters back home explaining his situation and his experience of war. So we're not just about pots, we can tell such a huge amount of stories from our collection. So thank you very much for that very brief sort of 15-20 minute gallop through Wedgwood history. I shall let John and John start up again. But thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Susan. I promised you to kind of make this relevant to equity, to charities if you're doing that with us. So this is my bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about donor motivation. Note that although this is a charitable collection, as Lucy said, it's owned by the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is itself a charity. It's now held on a trust, and so this collection that you saw outside is held on a trust. It is a trust if you do equity with us. So it's a charity, but it's not possibly what you think of in terms of charity or in terms of what you think of necessarily as donation. So I'm kind of shooing my charity interests a little bit into this context, but the law's the same. And then John's going to talk much more directly about the law of this place, which is really very, very interesting. So the nature of gifts, when we think of gifts to charity, we tend to think these days in terms of humanitarian assistance or the relief of poverty, but of course that's not true, because cultural collections are also charitable. Also educational purposes are charitable, and so any gift like that can be charitable and therefore held on a charitable trust. And so that's what essentially we've got out there. We've got property held on the trust. That picture's an old picture and it looks much less nice than it does now. I just looking it up on the internet. You probably tell me it's not even. It's not even Wedgwood, but so of course I know absolutely nothing about how you make parts, but those are killers, of course. But something that interests me, and something we're going to do in equity, is why people make gifts. So humanitarian gifts, or cultural gifts, or educational gifts. Being an academic like John, so our job really is to be critical. When people are talking about gifts, people tend to have a kind of doe-eyed sort of admiration for people that are giving away their property. But my job is actually to be kind of critical and say, is it good or not? And it isn't always. Sometimes it's really very vain and unpleasant. So this is a really fantastic case, which you'll see very briefly in Equity McCabe, University of Glasgow. And essentially, the landowner tried to, well, he did manage to build this in his lifetime, this great big kind of coliseum type thing. But on his death, he also attempted to build statues of himself as a gift to the nation. Build statues of himself in perpetuity. So the trust perpetually was going to keep building statues of himself all around his estate. So that's the first thing you can think about when you think about gifts. What's the motivation? Is it really kind? Is it really about other people, or can it sometimes be vain? And I certainly don't think that this collection is vain, but sometimes it can be. Museums and galleries have a charitable status, and that's the Smithsonian in the USA that's founded a charitable gift in a will. And a lot of organisations have a mix of donation support from private individuals and from people like us coming to visit and pay, sometimes memberships. But also the state, and that's really, really very important. So a lot of museums and galleries, including Smithsonian in Washington, actually get funded by the state. So when you think about what's charity, what's a charitable trust, keep that in mind as well. It's not always private action, quite often it's the state behind it. So you get these separate bodies, these separate organisations that also get state money. Just in the case law, you get people quite often trying to establish museums kind of in their image. Now, the really interesting thing about the Wedgwood collection, of course, is that it really is culturally valuable. It's something that's very important, that's kept together, as John's going to speak about. It's valuable for the nation, and it's of historic importance. But this is just something to talk about, is that people sometimes think their property is like that when it isn't. So the opinion is a nice famous case that we're going to do in the next semester. And in the opinion, someone tried to leave their house to the nation, full of their collection of tat and bric-a-brac, and they claimed that this was a charitable trust, that it could be held as a charitable trust for the nation. And yeah, that's actually the same in the Australian case with Gwilym. In the opinion, the judge actually just described it as a massive joke and said that that wasn't allowed. So interesting in the law, there's a kind of quality requirement if you're going to leave property to the nation. And of course, the Wedgwood collection passes that very, very easily. Gwilym's very much like the opinion. It just shows how discretionary these cases can be. This is a domestic house. It's someone trying to set up a museum of their own house. It's just an ordinary person with their own personal artifacts in it. In that one, the court actually said that was perfectly valid. Something that's interesting, I think, is when people do create collections and such like, or try and establish charities. One thing that often motivates them is a legacy. We've certainly got that with Wedgwood. We've got the name, we've got a family association like Lucy was talking about. People are often very motivated by, because collections last forever, and so it's a kind of immortality that often motivates people when they're doing this. But just note sometimes then it gets a bit weird. So with Wilson, 1913, guy tries to set up a school, and he kind of overdoes it, and so this case fails. The court didn't allow it to be established. It fails because the donor, he tries to set a timetable, he says, well, how much the staff are going to get paid, he says precisely where it is, he just overdoes it, so many conditions attached to it that the trust just isn't workable. Reed Dominion Student Hall Trust is quite a pleasant case, and that's this guy who's a financier, and he established a student hall in London, but he attached a colour bar to it, so it was only white students of the British Empire. So you can see people kind of mixing up their own values and their own traditions, sometimes with gifts. The court in 1947 removed that colour bar. So the court intervened later and sorted it out. But then note again, so if you've got a private person trying to create a legacy, trying to become in some way immortal, and then mixing in all their funny feelings and politics and conditions, the court needs to regulate that in some way. The law needs to make sure it doesn't get too vain, it doesn't get too useless, and all the conditions that are attached to it are so much that it's just not worth holding for the value of everybody else. Or how long is the time? Let's go straight to you, John. So, if anyone wants to talk about this at the end, we'll do that. Shall we? Okay, so just very quickly. So just the person next to you, will you just say, do you think donors should be able to attach conditions to their gifts? Okay, and now, will you just tell the table what you said?
might have that society that are using the gift in order for them to issue about me or one of the wanted to change to the person's record or so good.
Okay. So, what someone from this table, what do you think? Should donors be able to attach conditions to their gifts? If they're reasonable,
So it's like if it's the factory and there's racial autonomy, factory set a standard and looked after and polished well, then that would be positive and morally acceptable.
yes. So, so if they're reasonable and forward-looking, then why not? But this time.
Probably have the same opinion.
You shouldn't.
Shouldn't?
No.
Why not?
Well, you're kind of stripping away, like, with giving a gift, you're like giving them free will to choose what to do with it, and by taking away that, then you're kind of defeating the whole object of having a gift, because they can't choose what they want to do with it.
It's no longer a gift if you do that.
That's interesting. No, a gift if you attach conditions, and the law certainly allows you to attach conditions, and not only attach conditions, but do it in perpetuity, forever.
Yeah, I think you can attach conditions because it's a gift. I mean, that's why it's done and done. You're not paying for anything, so if I tell you to take it, just shut up and take it.
Okay, or not take it.
Yeah, I'll not take it, that's it. Yeah, I think, you can attach conditions. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. So, over to you, John.
Okay, right, so I'm going to talk about the negative end of things. I'm like the depressing last person. Not really, because what I'm going to try and suggest perhaps is that the law should reflect that which the humans who have created it intended. And as we'll see, sometimes things happen that causes those kinds of positive outcomes not to be achieved. So, unless you've been hidden away reading public law or some other subject that stopped you being able to think about reading newspapers, you'll have noticed, if you have been reading this press, that over late a lot of charities have gone into an insolvency procedure. So, generally speaking, a procedure that's designed, of course, to dissipate the assets of that entity, whatever it is, like Wedgwood, for example, generally amongst its creditors. And of course, we might say that that distribution is inconsistent with what a charity is trying to achieve. If it's keeping that collection together or some other charitable purpose under the Section 3 of the 2011 Charities Act. So it's that imbalance, that's that need to placate creditors in certain circumstances against the wider public purposes of what charities are for that I'll address very, very briefly. So there are some. You'll have heard of kids' companies soon. John and I have done a piece that's on the stocks in relation to how the directors of the kids' company behaved. So are you familiar with Camilla Batman Jelly? The lady who wears the big flowery dresses and stuff. She's basically in deep trouble. So we'll see what happens soon in the press on kids' company. But for today, we'll just mull on Wedgwood. Why is it an issue? Well, this smorgasbord, look, there are 12 options that an intending donor, to which John has spoken, can select in terms of a legal fiction or device through which to administer their charity. So you, broadly speaking, when John gives his lectures in a couple of weeks' time, will be looking at the charitable trust. So a public purpose trust as opposed to a private purpose trust or an express trust. The problem that some charities have is that on occasion, like Wedgwood did in 1962, or their solicitors, is that they decide not to use the trust instrument that we're all familiar with, that express trust, but instead they incorporate a company to administer that charity. So that's option 4 out of this whole group that they might select. So, of course, the problem that then occurs is that unlike a normal trust, where does legal title sit with a normal express trust, anybody? This is for a prize of another sweet on the way back. Where does legal title sit in a normal express trust?
The trustee.
Excellent, yeah. So if that trust in some way gets into difficulties, the onus of responsibility is on who? The trustee, isn't it? Yeah. But if the assets are not owned by the trustee with the legal title instead sits with a company, of course it's the company that is then responsible and has those assets, isn't it? And therein lies the problem that we need to address. So, which vehicle? Wedgwood, unfortunately, as I say, in 1962 selects the separately interested person. Briefly, I want to tell you that you might think this is a huge problem. Well, unfortunately, none of the statistical work on it show us that, to what extent there are insolvent charities out there. Although, of course, because of the slide that I've already shown you, we know that there are. So these are the two regulators of this area that we're looking at. The Insolvency Service, and of course the Charity Commission. As you can see from their responses, we don't even know really how many insolvent charities there are. But we can say that somewhere buried in that lot there are definitely insolvent charities. So, let's have a look at some cases. All of these cases, broadly speaking, relate to the type of trust that was extant here, or the type of charity, I should say, at Wedgwood. So they're all cases where legal title is held by the company, so by a juristic person, not a charitable trust, in each sense. So, I want to put a vote to you now. If the company, whichever one it is, like Wedgwood for example, gets into financial difficulty, let's say it owes its pension fund 126 million, and therefore it is technically insolvent. That's what happened here at Wedgwood. So the pension fund was owed that amount of funds, 126 million. Should the assets of Wedgwood be used to placate that exposure, 126 million, or should instead they still be used for the purpose for which they were given, namely charity, keeping that collection together as an important, nationally important, indeed internationally important, as Lucy's told us that collection stays together. So hands up if you think it should go to the pension fund and therefore creditors. Anyone? So should it go to pay off creditors? One person who is a banker by profession. Good. With a B, of course. Hands up if you think that the asset should stay in that general charitable purpose way that I've tried to explain. Good. So John does, Lucy definitely does, and most people do. Yeah. Okay, let's briefly look at these cases. So there are 11 potential trusts in Fingers Well Trust. Some were to gifts, rather, I should say. So you've got 11 gifts that were made by the testatrix. And of those gifts, some were to incorporated entities, so companies, and some were to normal trusts, so charitable trusts. I'll just deal with the incorporated entities. Briefly, what occurred in Fingers was that the constitution, the way in which that trust instrument had been drafted, was held by the judge to be sufficiently wide to allow that asset value to continue to be used for the purpose of charity. Even though, on the face of it, of course, the assets owned by the company should go to placate creditors. So for us, in our balance of, well, where does that value go, Fingers is a good case. Then we get to local interest. So this hospital is no longer a hospital, it's a group of houses, John was telling me earlier, over on the Wirral. But it was a very important heart research hospital back in its day, which was given some money for two purposes. One, to help people with heart problems, and one for research. The National Health Service took over many hospitals in the 1950s, including this one, meaning that the value that was left for research was still extant and not taken into the NHS, but was still floating around. So the question was, in this case, Mr. Justice Slade, should the money go to the company's shareholders, its members, or, in the alternative, should it still be held for some general charitable purpose for which it was originally given? It's the original intention. Slade held that the money should, first blush, because of the fact that it was owed by the company, the asset value research funds, should go to the members. So that gets diverted away from charity. However, he then looks at the constitutional document of the company and sees that there's a specific clause that says on the advent of insolvency of these issues, that money should then be diverted to a new entity, something called, or a device called CPRE, which is Lord French for the idea of something near. So in other words, we'll divert those research funds to another charity that does the same kind of activity as this one did before the NHS took it over. So both of these cases are helpful so far, aren't they? They both involve companies, as charitable companies, and they both involve techniques to help save that value for charity, don't they? This one, of course, it was a general charitable intention, and this one, it was a constitutional provision that allowed that diversion. Takes us to the most important case. So as I've already told you, in 2009, Wedgwood have some difficulties. Some administrators are appointed, so they come along in their car and literally walk into the building over there, take over. Walk in and go, all right chaps, guys, we're on board now, we're in charge. You're 126 million. What have you got here that we can use to placate the creditors, the pension fund, creditors amongst others? Oh look, there's an £18 million museum with lots of important assets. Let's take that and let's use that value. We've already had a vote on this issue. Most of you said, no, don't do that, that's naughty. Or particularly Lucy would think that was naughty, don't do it. It goes up before His Honour Judge Pearl QC in the Chancery Division, who has to decide, as Lucy said earlier when we first met, between the pension rights of those employees who after all are important, aren't they? You can't do over pensioners, can you, in some way, to placate general charitable purposes. So it's the pension rights versus, of course, this general idea of keeping together, perhaps, the Wedgwood Museum and its archive. Or, if we had a time machine, we to go back and tell that solicitor in 1962 to not use a corporate form, wouldn't it? Just use a charity. Because you've given us a whole heap of trouble, haven't you? Goes before Pearl. Hands up if you think he said the money should go to the creditors. So hands up if you think Pearl said the money goes to the creditors, the pension fund. Hands up if you think Pearl said, oh hang on, look, we've got these earlier cases where he salvaged the charitable purpose. Perhaps we'll try and use those in some way. Hands up, therefore, the charity was saved. Hands up if you think the charity was saved. Charitable purpose. Okay, that's the end of my talk. Read the case. I'm joking. So he actually held that the pension fund won out. So that's to say, the assets are held by the company, this charitable company, although it's of course not a profit wealth maximiser, it's a charity. Nevertheless, the legal title still sits with the company, both legally and beneficially, meaning those assets, these very important objects through the door there, are available for the creditors. So 2009 through to 2011, this is all litigated. The outcome, of course, is all that could be sold off to placate the pension fund. But as Lucy's already told us, of course, the Victoria and Albert Museum step in and I suppose bought the collection.
No, so the art fund they step in very, very quickly, and they are again a charity, and they sort of set about and try to raise the money in order to save the collection up to sort of £18 million. They were really good at doing that. I mean, they gave themselves a target of 3 months to raise the money. They actually finished raising money in 3 weeks, so great was the response from the public, from local businesses, people from the factory coming down with tins of loose change giving us money for it. So I was here at the time. the art fund as a charity, they can't legally hold items, so they held it for 1 minute and they donated it to the B&A Museum, so it can be held in perpetuity. It's 70 feet too. The art funds, the art funds are being
So excellent, yeah. So in terms of assets, we know of course that they are safe for that general charitable purpose, despite the inappropriate form perhaps that was used. Going back to my original point, by way of conclusion then, in terms of that tension about the vehicle that we've used, the device, the legal fiction that we've used, as compared with what we're trying to achieve, namely a general charitable purpose, we see that there is an imbalance that, but for the new benefactors that Lucy and John have talked to, would have meant that that asset value was dissipated, which of course is problematic, or it could be. Okay, any questions broadly on what I've covered? Yeah.
So what's the benefit then of using the corporate style?
So corporate forms, yeah. So limited liability. So it depends which form you use. So back in our big list of forms, you'll see that some have limited liability. So this one does, for example, so the one that Wedgwood used. So it was the group of companies back in 1962. There was a group of Wedgwood companies. It was the case that the charitable company was the last company standing within the group, and the permanent pension regulations meant that all responsibility then fell on that company. So there's some suggestion that it's at the whim of the solicitor at the time as to which of these structures is used, as opposed to a carefully thought through idea of which one would you'd use for the qualities that perhaps you're talking to. So limited liability, of course, protection, more secrecy than if perhaps you used other structures as well in terms of how you use your activity. But of course, some of the other juristic persons are not having limited liability features either, so these two don't. And then others, it could be the kind of ideas that John talked to in his paper also, the idea of public perception, so royal charters like the BBC, renewed every 10 years, so the glamour of different forms of incorporation or usage. But of late, of course, more specialist entities have developed that have qualities that perhaps are better suited to charities. Any other questions? Okay, well I've got some questions for you then, and the prizes for these questions are below me here. So when we were having lunch, John and I snuck into the museum. Lucy didn't notice, and we liberated these four. So you can now win these 4 pieces. They're actually 3 pieces of Wedgwood, and then we've got Lucy to authenticate this. In fact, it isn't Wedgwood, so I'll just throw that away. But I won't. That's John's actually from his private collection. Won't put it there. That's an incredibly rare pot. Okay. So for this piece of gasware, well, you never know, it could be worth millions, so let's get all authenticated. It's like bargaining. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of what that is?
So it's a 1986 plate of A Speakerless Treating a Youth, which is the relief on the front, blue jasper.
We might keep that. So the question for this, so if you want to win this, ready? This is the question. Which battle was Lucy's research subject killed in? Your hands. Yeah, excellent, well done. You're close. Right up to the first hand as well. Right, so the next piece of hopefully bona fide Wedgwood.
Yeah, back 1974.
Wow.
Rather nice.
Well, that's
Handy dish.
brilliant. So that one. What year was the first day of production at Wedgwood, at the factory? Lucy referred to it, and the first day vases were created.
Is it 1906?
No, someone else?
1976? Oh, 1769.
No. No.
No, it's sort of getting warmer.
Yeah, you're getting in. Okay, I'll do another one then. What was the name of the judge in the Wedgwood case that I referred to? Someone said
Pearl.
Pearl, yeah, well done. Yeah, so Pearl, 1974 and then hopefully this last piece of
Look at the posy art.
posing, was that flowers?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
61, 1961, crazy job.
61? I thought all these were dodgy places themselves, was it like a properly good place? I'll go back there. Right, that might be, you know, to the museum. What shape number did Lucy refer to? Was it a coffee pot or a teapot? A coffee pot, the shape number?
251?
No, something else?
225?
Brilliant, well done, yeah, 225. So, sorry about the whistle-stop nature of our talks, but basically we've got shopping to do, so well done, joking. So, any questions to me, John or Lucy about anything we've briefly covered? Okay, John and I have got full papers, so if you want to read the full papers, we can email them to you as well. But just remains for us to thank John for organising it, and Lucy also for